The National Weather Service's office in our region has nearly a dozen vacancies ahead of hurricane season. On Monday, 3 House Democrats, Representative Lizzie Fletcher, Sylvia Garcia, and Al Green, sent a letter to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration asking why the National Weather Service's Houston Galveston office will soon lose its top 3 leadership staffers. And joining us in studio right now to talk about this and other issues is Congressman Lizzie Fletcher. Welcome to Hello Houston.
Thanks so much, Celeste. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Ernie. I'm so glad to be with y'all in person in your fabulous new studio.
And before we get into the conversation, you can join the conversation by calling or texting at 713-440-8870. Come join us.
Full disclosure, you're my rep.
Fabulous.
I voted
I'm so
for
glad
you.
to know it.
I mean, I don't want to,
well, thanks for that, too.
I'm just putting it out there. I voted for you, and it's nice to see you again.
Thank you. It's great to see you again. I'm thrilled to be here. I know last time I called in, and I just love the energy with this show. I love listening to y'all. I think I told y'all I have a Sonos radio system in D.C., so whenever I'm there, I tune in to Houston Public Media so that I can hear what's happening at home.
That's right.
Nice.
So let's talk about the National Weather Service's office here in our region. I mean, clearly we understand there's 12 vacancies, but there's also top 3 key roles. We're going into hurricane season. Y'all wrote this letter. What does a letter do exactly?
I know. It's a great question. It is one of the few ways that members of Congress really have and can use to communicate. Certainly we can draft legislation. That obviously takes a long time. So we communicate and use letters to get the attention of folks, especially in the administration, sometimes of other members of Congress. We send a lot of letters to the speaker or to the appropriators. But in this case, we sent a letter to the acting NOAA administrator who is been appointed as a political appointee about the situation here in Houston. Now, we're not alone. You know, there are major staffing shortages across the country, somewhere from 20 to 40%. And that is because, as you all know, over the last 100 days, we have just seen these massive staffing cuts, often without a lot of forethought, kind of firing people by category, like they're probationary employees, which means they're new and they have fewer protections. So we'll just fire all of them. So there's a lot that's coming out of this administration across the administration in all kinds of departments, and that's happened here.
You can be a probationary for 2 years.
You can be probationary for 2 years, and also sometimes they're very senior people who've gotten a promotion. So they're probationary in their new role, but they have years, even decades of experience. So we're losing a lot of talent, and certainly that's happening at the National Weather Service. And so, like I said, across the country, anywhere from 20 to 40% here. It's 44% right now, with the top 3 spots either gone or going, announced resignations. Many people have taken this buyout offer. And so we asked a lot of questions about that. We want to make sure that we have a permanent team in place and a plan for a permanent team in place for our region as we're approaching hurricane season. Frank, nobody knows better than you how important it is that we get this information. There are real impacts for the forecast. Not only is the existing staff going to be totally overworked, but they just can't do everything we need them to do. And I'll add one thing that wasn't in our letter because I learned it after. Now I'm working on this. But we also have 4 National Weather Service employees that are embedded with the FAA at the airports to give advice. 4 people. We're down to 2 there, too, in the Houston region. And so they give advice, especially during this time of year when you're having storms and increased heat. Well, frankly, increased heat is year-round around here. But, at these times, you need those folks advising the air traffic controllers to help make decisions. And so we're short there, too.
And to your point, there are 5 electronic technicians at the National Weather Service. Only 2 are left. Now, what do? They maintain the Doppler radar. They maintain the computers. They maintain the weather balloons. Everything electronic. Can you imagine? You can have all the meteorologists there, but if you don't have the support in the engineering staff, you are in big trouble.
Yeah, you need the data.
Exactly, and you don't disseminate it as it's needed.
Right. And I guess before we get into all of the impact this will have on the area, I'm curious the impact of the letter. Do you hope this will shift? Will they be able to replace these people? I mean, we are, as you said, right up on hurricane season. Is it already a done deal for us and the letter is more to draw attention to the matter, or is there some idea behind how it can fix things?
Well, I certainly hope it can fix things. And I do think one of the challenges that is clear right now is that they're doing so many things so rapidly and kind of flooding the zone so that it's hard for all of us even to see, like, members of Congress, members of the public. There's so much happening. There's another outrage, something every day.
Right.
So, yes, people need to pay attention, but people here are already paying attention. I'm hearing from constituents about these concerns and hearing from professionals about these concerns. And so my hope is that our letter tells them, hey, this is a problem you need to fix. This is something you really need to solve. And we've asked constructively, what are your plans? What are you going to do in the short term? What are you going to do in the long term? I know that one of the things they're suggesting, and we're hearing this kind of across the board, is that it can be replaced with technology. So we might wind up with more computer models, but without the meteorologists to interpret them and use their experience, expertise, and training that we need.
AI is not there yet.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, though. I mean, I understand, we need 5, or we used to need 5 or 6 potential people sitting there and doing that. With technology, do you think some people are thinking we are, again, moving in the right direction if we can be more efficient with the people that we have in place?
Well, it's a great question generally. And I've always said that what people that I represent want, and I think it's true for people across our community, we want government to be efficient, effective, and ethical. What we're seeing here is not coming out of that intent. That isn't what's happening right now in terms of the number of federal employees that are being fired, laid off, offered these buyouts. As Frank just said, the technology is necessary. I'm not a meteorologist. I'm not an expert on what exactly we do need for the future, but this doesn't seem to be part of a long-range plan that's about shifting the way the operations are done. And if it is, it's certainly not being communicated or rolled out that way.
Well, and one of the big concerns is, the cone of uncertainty, the forecast cone, that has gotten smaller. But it still has a line down the middle. And the National Hurricane Center is trying to get the message out. Don't look at that cone, because you have to look at the effects of the storm and what it's going to have on your neighborhood. You can have a storm hit Houston and you can have a tornado outbreak in New Orleans from the same storm. So it's about what is going to happen to you. But we need people there to be able to interpret that cone and those effects, because a computer, as good as it can get, is going to say it's going to be this strong, maybe, and it's going to go here, maybe. But you need human beings to say, this is what's going to happen.
Well, and to that point, I think you raised 2. Think about last summer. Think about the derecho. Seemed like it came out of nowhere.
It did come out of nowhere. I was there.
Right. And then with Beryl, we all thought it was going to South Texas, for a long time.
I can show you a Facebook post a week ahead of time.
Representative Fletcher, my other question for you would be essentially, okay, so now we understand as Houstonians and people that live in this area, we feel that sense of urgency. You've sent this letter. You have other representatives behind you, Sylvia Garcia, Al Green. What happens next? What is the plan here?
Well, there are a couple of things that we can do, and we're continuing to try to do as members of Congress. Obviously, the letters is one form, and engagement directly with the agencies is important. And so we're trying to do that. I have a whole team. We make phone calls. We try to reach out to people in the administration. Obviously, it was a little bit easier in the last administration. We had a lot of contacts over that 4 years. It's newer, and a lot of people, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of new people there, different legislative affairs team. But we try to stay in touch in every way we can. But also, I think, making sure that the public does know and is prepared. Some of the things I was just thinking when Frank was talking is like, one of the things they've gotten rid of right now is translations of the storm warnings.
To Spanish?
Into Spanish or anything else right now. And so they've said it's temporary. I hope they're going to fix it. But attention, right? The squeaky wheel does get the grease. So we need to fix that problem before we're trying to warn people in this area or anywhere in the country
it took us years
about
to get
severe weather.
It took us years to get that.
Yeah. So
I just
we
want
got
to
to get it
remind
back.
everyone we are talking with Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, who represents our area here in Texas in the U.S. Capital, I should say it like that. I'm trying to figure out how to do it. Whenever we have representatives, they have districts, but you represent us all, too, at the same time. The number, if you want to call and join the conversation, is 713-440-8870. To go to my question, though, that follows off that is, in this time, and we hear so much about it, I know it's moving a little bit away from the exact thing you're talking about with us today, but it's this, how do you work across the aisle today? There is so much talk about, Democrats can't do anything. Republicans have the House, they have the Senate, they have the presidency. But where can we make changes from the other party? How do you find balance, and what are you specifically doing to kind of build that so that we can move forward?
Yeah, well, as I think you know, I hope you know, Ernie, I went to Washington back in 2019 with the view, exactly as you said, of like really representing people across our community, certainly the 7th Congressional District, which I'm so proud to represent, and to really think about our region and be an advocate and do things the way we do it here, which is we come together from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different viewpoints, and we work together to get things done. And that is my approach as a member of Congress representing this community. It has, as you said, gotten harder. And one of the reasons, frankly, it's harder is because a lot of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have abdicated their job as members of Congress, and they're just taking direction from the White House. You're not seeing a lot of dissent
in the media, or when you turn the cameras off, are you folks working together better?
Well, kind of now the cameras are always on, right? True. And so I think that, right? I mean, this is the world we're living in now, and we're all trying to communicate more and share that. And certainly there are opportunities, and I will continue to find those opportunities. But on some of the big things that we're dealing with, there are big fights ahead. I'm gearing up to go back on Monday, and we're going to have a huge fight over healthcare next week, over funding for Medicaid. The president and Congress have called to drastically cut spending through this process that I won't get into the details of budget reconciliation, but we're going through this huge process, and they want my committee to cut $880 billion of spending, and most of that's going to come out of Medicaid, and that is going to affect people in our community across the board, not just Medicaid recipients. Same thing with SNAP benefits, food assistance, that's up next week. So there's a lot of really big fights, and one of the frustrations is that where we should be able to find common ground, we're not, because the folks on the other side are kind of rubber stamping what comes out of the White House and taking orders from the president instead of exercising their independent judgment and representing the people that they're there to represent who count on these benefits.
I want you to clarify one thing that you said there that I've heard before, and I think everyone needs to realize this. They have said for this particular budget you were talking about, you have to cut $800 million, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm. Out of my committee.
Out of your, right. There is not enough other monies so that it doesn't touch Medicare and Medicaid money.
Well, it's
right?
just Medicaid.
Okay,
it's
Medicaid.
not Medicare.
Okay.
Medicare can't be touched in this process. But one thing people don't necessarily realize is a lot of people on Medicare actually get Medicaid benefits because Medicaid covers a lot of nursing home care.
So
people don't realize that.
Cut that amount without touching it.
You cannot. And there's actually a letter, I could find it for you if you want to put it on your website, from the Congressional Budget Office, where the chair of my committee and the chair of the Budget Committee asked, can this nonpartisan agency tell us, can you get that much money out of the Energy and Commerce Committee, that is the committee I serve on, the most powerful committee in Congress, and we are responsible for most of the things you can think of, including healthcare and energy policy. And so there are a few cuts. There's a few cuts from energy. They want to. Let me say one other thing. We haven't seen the legislation yet, so we're going to start working on it on Tuesday. Democrats have yet to see it, but we can anticipate what's going to be in there. There's enough sort of leaked memos and, hallway chatter that we have several ideas of what's coming our way.
So basically they say, we're not telling
you
to
to
cut
cannot
health
do
care.
it without cutting Medicaid.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about a lot of things. They're talking about the biggest thing that I expect we will still see, because they're saying it, is implementing work requirements for Medicaid recipients. And in my district alone, we have about 81,000 people that get Medicaid benefits. About 60,000 of those are children. And 57% of the adults are already working. And so I don't know that you're going to get a lot more out of that, but what we have seen in states, we just did a study on this too, what we have seen in states that have imposed those work requirements, it's really just a bunch of red tape, and they kicked people off of the program, but didn't save any money because they spent so much time administering it. That happened in Arkansas and Georgia. What we see here, that's one of the big things that they're talking about. But here in Texas, we have a very lean Medicaid program. Basically, it's based on the federal poverty level, which is a little bit more than $15,000 a year in income for an individual person. And you have to be basically over 65 or a child or kind of a mother, still within the first year. That's a recent expansion in Texas. It was a great improvement. But in terms of the work requirements, we think is definitely headed our way. They're talking about changing the percentage that the federal government covers in Medicaid. It's a state-federal partnership, and the federal government has historically promised a minimum amount of the coverage, and the state administers the program. So, it's complicated. They're talking about lowering how much the federal government will pay. And in states like ours, that's a huge problem. And of course, the legislature is going to be out of session after June 2nd. So they seem to think that the states will pick up the difference. But our legislature isn't even meeting. I mean, there's so many problems with the way this is happening and the assumptions that are being made about the bottom line and all of this is that people are going to lose their health care. And it's going to impact everyone. Can I tell you all one more story? Because I just think this is really powerful. I had somebody in a hearing asking about this. And I said, this is another statistic a lot of people probably don't know. Medicaid covers 50% of the births in Texas.
Oh,
Half
wow.
of the babies born in Texas are
I didn't
covered
know
under
that.
Medicaid. And so I asked a witness, if you cut Medicaid, what's going to happen? And they said, well, obviously it will be a problem, but those people will still need to give birth, right? And so they'll still need the care, but they won't have the coverage. But hospitals that are counting on these Medicaid payments that aren't going to get them are going to wind up having to close their labor and delivery units, some of them, especially the rural hospitals in Texas. And, while in Houston we have so many wonderful hospitals and places to go, we may be slightly differently situated than folks across the state. That's one of the first things that hospitals might have to cut as they look at these severe funding cuts. And so we're still going to have the need. People are still going to need the health care. And we're going to see hospitals closing. We're going to see everybody across the state have reduced access to care. And so it's a huge problem for everyone, not just the folks who are relying on Medicaid for their
And it's a
coverage.
huge problem for all these red states, too. And what about reaching out to the governors, especially on the National Weather Service issue, because they're affected by hurricanes from here to Florida and up to North Carolina for sure. As we know, you don't have to be at the coast to have a real problem with hurricanes and flooding. But have the governors not supported this letter that you sent?
Well, we just sent the letter, so I would love to get the governor's support for the letter. I would love to get folks, certainly in areas like ours, supporting and pushing back against the administration against these cuts. And we have seen that states and governors have been pretty effective in the last 100 days in communicating or, frankly, in going to court to stop certain things. Lots of states' attorneys general have been doing that. Obviously, Texas is not really one of them. But we saw last year that this crazy weather doesn't just hit us along the coast. We saw the flooding across the South and the mountains of North Carolina. So we know that this is a problem for everyone across the country. And on this,
FEMA,
we should agree.
What's FEMA going to do about all this?
Well, you saw what happened this week, didn't
I
you?
did,
With
yes.
the FEMA administrator testified, the acting administrator testified before Congress. He'd been appointed by the president. He's not a holdover. And he testified, and someone, do you think that we should get rid of FEMA as Secretary Noem has suggested and the president has suggested? He said, no, we might make some changes at FEMA, but I think it's an important agency. Yeah. The next day he was fired. He was fired.
I do have a question going back to when you were talking about Medicare being, is it Medicare or Medicaid being 50% of Medicaid, excuse me. Medicaid covering 50% of Texas births. Because I feel like a lot of people would question that are in favor of that, would question essentially, do we know how many of those births are of documented citizens? Have we looked into, because that seems like a very high number in the biggest state, one of the biggest states in the nation.
It is a high number, but these are statistics that come from the Department of Health and Human Services. We look at the tables all the time for who's covered and who's not. And of course, Medicaid is making the payments to the hospitals and the providers across our community and across the state. So the numbers are real. I know they sound high. I think they're surprising. They're shocking in some ways.
Really
but
high.
We also know that two things. Texas has the highest uninsured rate in the country for health insurance, period. Texas has the worst rate of health insurance in the country. And we know that you can get Medicaid when you are pregnant and immediately postpartum. And thanks to the legislature, they expanded the time. It used to be 3 months postpartum. Now it's been expanded to a year from the last legislative session. So people can get coverage. So what we're talking about is we have a big population of people who qualify, and we have a ton of people who don't have any insurance. Who are able to get Medicaid when they are pregnant. But it's a huge problem in Texas, and we rely on so many fantastic institutions. I know, Frank, you were talking about some of these great organizations you support, and we have these federally qualified health clinics in our community, like Legacy and the Hope Clinic. And so there are so many institutions that we rely on as a safety net, but there are a lot of people that do not have health care in our state.
And drilling down right here in Harris County, we just recently looked at the Harris County Public Health surveys, and we found that, Harris County has one of the highest birth mortality rates. So to me, the fact that we're looking at this at Texas is really quite alarming.
It's very alarming. Harris County has a real maternal mortality problem. And one of the things, the state has studied it and has issued studies, but has delayed some of the more recent studies so we can understand some of the impacts of recent legislation, especially around reproductive health care. But yeah, we have a huge problem here in Houston, and we should be trying to make it better, not worse. These cuts are going to make it worse.
And I just want to put a button on what we were talking about when it comes to health care, just to be clear, because when I asked you the question earlier, I didn't have the verbiage to say it correctly. Energy and Commerce has been told to cut how much from their overall budget?
$880 billion.
And in their auspices is Medicaid.
Yes.
If you were to gather everything else that committee does outside of Medicaid, you wouldn't reach that amount.
That is completely true. And
Now we hold you right there just to make
yes,
the point
that
to
is
everyone.
true.
So when they say we are not telling Congress to cut Medicaid, we're just telling them to cut this much from that committee, there is no mathematical way to do it any other way.
There is no mathematical way to
That's
do
what
it
I wanted to
without
say. Good point,
cutting
Ernie.
Medicaid.
Yeah. So I just want to say we are talking with
quick
Lizzie
text.
Fletcher, and our number here, if you want to join into the conversation, 713-440-8870.
So Ed in Galveston says, regarding NOAA cuts, if we're going to rely on better tech, how do we build and pay for these new systems? We haven't paid to modernize air traffic control.
Well, it's a great question.
Yeah,
and I
it
think
is.
that kind of goes to the point earlier, which is you may want to make changes, but this isn't the way that you do it. And certainly you would want to phase in and test and work with the experts at the National Weather Service about what those changes be. I assume, and Frank, you can tell us better than I can, that there have been advances in technology and changes and improvements that have helped really refine those forecasts
And all
the
of
work.
it, and all of it comes from NOAA Weather Research, which they are also cutting. We had Alan Seals here from the American Meteorological Society talking about that just on Tuesday. And thank goodness they're speaking up and you're speaking up, because government employees, they can't say anything unless it's anonymous.
Well,
they're
that's
afraid
a huge
they're afraid to
problem.
speak up.
Yeah, I hear you, and I know that it's true. I've been trying to talk to people as much as I can across the district and across the area, but I think that's a really important point, too, if I can just make it, because it's more than the weather. We're kind of creating a culture where people can't speak up. And to me, that is un-American, whether it is the federal employees, and it is Public Service Appreciation Week. So, we have a ton of federal employees that I've been thinking about all week that do so many things in our community. But you're creating this culture of fear. You're making it hard to speak up. If you raise your hand, you're the first one to get fired. And it's not just federal employees. We see it across the board that if you speak out against the administration, I mean, like I said, the FEMA administrator who got fired the day after testifying to Congress, that's not right. And that's not how we do things in this country. We talk about things, we work together. And to your original point, Ernie, how do we work together? You have to have the conversations about what's working and what's not, and what are ideas for solutions, and really hash it out so that you can get to a better place. And when you create a culture of silence and fear and retribution, that is bad for everybody.
And that's what we do here, is have conversations, and we invite you to join the conversation at 713-440-8870. Carrie is on the line from Northwest Houston. Carrie, what's your question for Representative Fletcher?
Hi, thank you for having this show. I would like to know why Congress never debates the defense budget. They just increase the defense budget every year, and they've been doing that since Reagan, and it's really frustrating.
Carrie, we'll find out right
Great
now.
question.
Well, I'm not sure that I can go all the way back to Reagan, but I've
I
only
can.
been there. But Frank will do it. But I will say, I have support. I have voted in support of the defense budget over the years, and I think it's important. But one of the things that congressional Democrats have always insisted is that we have parity in our increases as we're adjusting for inflation and other things, that we're covering these sort of non-defense programs and things that people across our community rely on. I mean, I was just talking about, whether we're making sure we're funding Medicaid, whether we're funding the nutrition assistance program, SNAP, other, previously known as food stamps, that we're covering the programs that people rely on, and they do, right? That we're taking care of our veterans when they come home, and we're seeing these cuts in the president's budget. The president, I don't want to get into the weeds of like how it works, but the president sends over a budget to Congress every year. This is what I'd like. Congress has the power of the purse. This is another thing that's under attack right now, but Congress has the power of the purse. We go through this whole appropriations process. We all weigh in on what we want. And then to your point, we vote on the budget. The Senate votes on the budget. It goes to the president to be signed into law. And there is substantial defense spending. And I think in the time that we're living in and, the concerns we have about national security and other things, there is certainly appropriate spending. But as we talk about new technologies, as we talk about different things, there are various things that want to get funded. And it is a competition while you're also dealing with, what are you going to fund? How are you going to fund? And so if you look at your budget, it's your priorities, right? Your budget is a statement of priorities. And what we've seen is the president has sent over increased defense funding again this year, but has completely cut, for example, National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for Humanities, Institute for Museum and Library Science. Last night, he fired the Librarian of Congress, which everyone I know is up in arms about because she is phenomenal. And so you see kind of the values, cutting the budget for FEMA, cutting the budget certainly for some of these programs. And that is a fight every year in Congress. And I totally take your point. And I think it's really important that Congress engage in this process and that we are responsible for the budget. And right now what you're seeing is the president is just not spending money we've already directed and spending it differently. There's a lot going on. It's been a crazy 100 days.
Carrie, thank you for your call.
Now, I know you mentioned that, we keep upping the defense budget and we've lowered some of the arts. And I think I'm 100% proponent of the arts. But don't you think that is a little bit of apples to oranges when we're looking at the budget and saying, we're going to cut librarians, but we need to keep our country safe?
Of course we need to keep our country safe. And that's kind of the founding principle of government, right? Why do people come together, right? We come together and the government's first responsibility is public safety.
And health.
But it is also true that we, and this goes to like a fundamental question that we should be having as Americans, a conversation about like, what is the purpose of the government? What is it there for? And in my view, and the view of a lot of people around here, we come together, we pool our resources, and we tackle challenges that we can't do individually, right? And so we pool our money for research, right? For scientific research. We pool our money for the National Weather Service. We pool our money for emergencies, for FEMA. We've talked about those. We pool our money for cancer research. And we're seeing that cut, right? That has huge impacts here. I mean, people in our community are being laid off. Incredible, innovative studies, and the work that we're all so proud happens here in Houston is being threatened, not just being threatened, is being cut off because the federal government is cutting off that funding. So the question is, what do we value? Do we want to invest in research for cures to cancer and Alzheimer's? Do we want to have the leading scientific enterprise in the world, which the United States has led the world in scientific research? And we also, to your point about defense, we've cut all of these programs and all of this spending that we used to do through our State Department around the world that did help keep us safe. Things like USAID, that was very early on in this administration. But what you saw is, number one, USAID and the work that they did helped us build relationships around the world, helped us gain intelligence around the world. And by the way, when they had containers full of food that was supposed to be shipped across the world, the farmers in the United States who grow that food didn't have a market for it anymore. I mean, it's a complicated system. There are a lot of moving parts, but coming in with, as Elon Musk said, a chainsaw is not the way to do this reform. We need to engage as citizens about what are our values, what are our priorities, what do we want to fund, and that's really what the appropriations process is every year.
I would think also Carrie's question comes out of the idea every time we look at the budget, defense spending, the military is such a huge part of it. And so instead of hacking away at that, they're hacking away at all these other organizations, all these other lines of funding, which are so much smaller. And so
much
that
smaller.
People look at them and think, well, why? Why are you destroying and decimating this when you could take just a tiny part out of the defense budget and it would bring this savings?
I'm gonna throw this out there. You talk about the quote from Elon Musk saying, taking a chainsaw. But don't you think to a certain extent that's needed to happen? I mean, don't you think for a long time people have been very, working together? And what has it gotten to us? I think there's a big group of people that voted for President Trump that said, you know what? We want somebody to come in and actually do something that we can see is making a difference. Whether you think that's a good difference or a bad difference, it's a difference.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I do think there are a lot of people in this community and certainly in the state who voted for President Trump. And I think people express their concerns. Obviously, I can't speak for all of them, but by and large, a lot of what we heard is costs are too high, inflation's high. I'm having trouble affording a house, right? I'm spending too much of my budget, like just trying to get groceries. Like people were frustrated. And I would add to it as a member of Congress, there's a lot of stuff I feel like we should have been able to get done that we haven't gotten done yet. So I take your point, but I don't think the way they're going about doing this is the right way. I don't think we're seeing good outcomes. I think it is absolutely possible to look at how we're spending money, where we can have efficiencies. And in the past, we have done this. Not only did President Clinton do it with I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was like reimagining government. And they had a commission that worked over the entire presidency and significantly reduced federal spending and agencies, but they did it over time. They made recommendations to Congress about, hey, you really don't need this anymore, or you do. So that happened. But that wasn't the first time it happened. And I think it's really important. My husband, who loves to read presidential biographies, shared with me as he was reading that both Truman and Eisenhower had these commissions to, right after World War II, there's been a ton of government spending. How do we rethink this? How do we redo it? And both of them had actually former President Herbert Hoover chair these commissions. But those commissions were bipartisan. They included subject matter experts who understood what they were talking about. They worked for at least a year, sometimes more, gathering information, talking to people, and then making recommendations to the president and Congress. And many of those, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but let's say 75% of those recommendations got implemented. And so it is possible to do exactly what you're talking about, but the way they're doing it is all wrong. And a lot of people are worried that Elon Musk is taking the data that's in these siloed federal databases and merging it together and violating not only the law and other things, but our privacy. And so it's very important to Americans to protect their data privacy that's in the IRS, right? That's in their health records. There's all kinds of stuff that they're doing with no guardrails. And so to your question, I totally think you can get more efficient. And I think that you can take a hard look at what we're doing, how we can do it better. And I agree with you that people wanted things to change. But what's changing and whether this Doge group is actually changing anything for the better or actually saving any money, those are still open questions. But what they're doing and how they're doing it, the way they're going about it, it is going to cause us problems for decades. The way that they're firing these federal employees, how do we sustain a workforce of the people we know we need when you could be fired on a whim on an email on a Tuesday night from...
And how do you get kids to want to go into government work?
Exactly.
I have kids all the time. Should I be a National Weather Service meteorologist? And now I'm like, I used to say yes, it's a great job. Now I'm like, I don't know.
And we want you to say yes because we need you.
Yes.
Because we need these people.
The message is terrible.
As a society, right? This is what we're funding. This is what we're doing together. These are joint investments we're making, and we want them to be as successful as possible. So questioning them, really looking at them and making sure we're doing it right, I 100% agree. But people wanted Donald Trump to focus on bringing down costs. And so far, we haven't seen any of that. We've seen these tariffs that are sending costs sky high. And that has a huge impact on our economy, not only because it's going to cost us all more, which it is, but also because you're seeing fewer containers coming into the port of Houston. You know, the latest I heard was that maybe it's 20% down in terms of the number of containers coming in on these ships. There's so many challenges, and there's a ripple effect throughout the economy. And so we're not seeing the president bringing costs down and addressing people wanted more health care. Instead, that's getting cut too. So this is really, I want to be support. I want us all to succeed. And what we're seeing as this administration rolls out these programs is the opposite. And that is a huge problem for everybody, no matter how you voted. That's the problem we have right now.
Our phone number here is 713-440-8870. We got some calls backed up for you that want to chat with you. So let's start off with Jason. Jason, what's on your mind?
Hi, and thank you for bringing me on to the show today. I kind of want to piggyback a little bit on what was just discussed, is that we have the outsourcing of a lot of technical positions going on. It's not a new issue, but it's continuing right now. And just like was mentioning, I've had people, I'm a software engineer, say, should I get into this field? And other people like parents and saying that steer clear of tech jobs because your job is just going to be sent overseas. It's a security issue as well, because right now India is in conflict with Pakistan. Do we really want to be sending all of our systems from major companies and things overseas?
Let's find out what the Congresswoman thinks on this.
Well, it's a great question. It's a big question. Thank you for calling and asking about it. And I think, you know, one of the things we've actually been working on in Congress is making sure, and not just, this right now, but since I've been there, and certainly once President Biden was elected and after we went through the pandemic and as we were going through it, making sure that we did invest in jobs and in manufacturing in the United States of the things we know we need, because we saw those shortages, during the pandemic in particular. And some of my colleagues have long been advocating around Make It in America agenda. And so what you saw in the Biden administration, and when we were in the majority in the first 2 years of that administration in Congress, these hugely significant pieces of legislation and investment. So whether it was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, where we are rebuilding our roads, bridges, ports, and airports. And by the way, our community has benefited to the tune of more than $1 billion in federal funding from those investments. But also, for example, the CHIPS and Science Act that was also spearheaded by Texans. The chairwoman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, was a real driver for the CHIPS and Science Act to reinvest in both the scientific enterprise and scientific education in the United States, but also in building those chips that are in everything and that we know we need, that we're building those chips in the United States. And so you saw tremendous investment here in Texas. We have Samsung and Texas Instruments building huge new fabs. They're building in Arizona and other places to make sure that we are, to your point, producing and manufacturing things that we need here at home. And I think that is a great and important effort. I also think that we engage with people around the world through trade, and that we need to be smart about how we are sourcing things, and that we are continuing some of that relationship building that we do through trade. And I'll tell you, I remember when I first got there, we were facing an avocado shortage. And I was like, well, there's one thing that Republicans and Democrats and independents in my district will agree on, is everybody wants guacamole.
Absolutely.
Right? Everybody wants guacamole. And so when we look at what's happening in terms of, tariffs on Mexico and Mexican produce, when you start looking at how interconnected the things that we all use every day and think about every day, they come from all over the world. And in produce and things, that means we can get what we want year round, right? So there are a lot of different things that we should just be smart about manufacturing the things that we need, whether it's in terms of our healthcare or in terms of chips, in terms of other things. And certainly when it comes to national security apparatus, we want to have those things here.
I want to grab another call, but quickly, I thought the power to levy tariffs was with the Congress, not with the president. And if that is the fact, why is Congress not outraged?
You are correct. And many members of Congress are outraged. I think I just signed on to half a dozen pieces of legislation about this. But over time, Congress has delegated a lot of its trade authority to the president. And so these are choices that Congress has been made, maybe because some of those trade fights were hard in the past and they've sort of sent it off to the executive. So Congress has delegated its authority, and there's a pretty big push right now in Congress to take it back.
Okay, we're going back to the phone. Jack is on the line giving us a question for the Congresswoman. Jack, what's on your mind?
Yes, this is Jack Valinsky, the president of Neartown Montrose Super Neighborhood. I want to know if the West Alabama project, the project that the mayor put on hold for a whole year, has that been defunded?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, Jack, but I can definitely get back to you. What I can tell you for sure is that a lot of the programs and projects that were getting federal grant funds have been put on hold by the administration, even folks that weren't on pause kind of here locally. I think I actually put a link in my weekly email last week. I send a weekly email, so if anybody doesn't get it and wants more of me, you can sign up for my email. And I put a link in last week to something that our ranking member of appropriations, which is the top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, put together of about $430 million in federal grants that had been awarded and not out. So I can't speak to that specific project, but I can tell you there's a lot of grant money that's supposed to come to our community that this administration has held up.
So we don't have much time left. So this is a pretty quick question.
Sure.
Are we in the midst of an oligarchy?
Well, that's not a quick question.
It's a yes or no.
I think that there has historically been a push in our history about who's going to be in charge. And right now, the people in charge think that we should have a very small group, an oligarchy, a small group of people that make the decisions for the rest of us. My view and the view of the folks in my caucus is that we should all be in charge of our government. We all have a say. All Americans should be empowered to be a part of our government in making these decisions. And I think what I'm hearing more, and I think we should all be aware of and concerned about, is this sort of move towards autocracy and to consolidating power in one person and one branch. We have three branches of government that are equal. The first branch of government is the Congress. The second branch of government is the executive, which is there to make sure that the laws that Congress passes are executed. And then we have the courts. And what we're seeing in this administration is a wholesale dismissal of Congress unless Congress does what it wants. And so you see the president ignoring the law in certain cases, not spending money Congress has appropriated, et cetera. And then you see what's happening in the courts. And I think people are deeply concerned about how the administration's responding to certain orders in the courts. But we are having good success in the courts where the administration's overstepping. The judges of all appointed by many different presidents all across the country are holding the administration accountable and making sure that the administration follows the law. But we need to make sure that we continue to have those checks and balances, that we have three functioning branches of government, and that we don't slip into an autocratic state. And you could look around the world, there's a move toward it. We in the United States of America believe in democracy. We believe in the power of the people and a government of, by, and for the people.
Congressman Lizzie Fletcher represents District 7. Thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thanks so much, Celeste. It's great to be with y'all, and I can't wait to come back.
Coming